Rajiv Kapoor had it all, or at least, that's what everyone believed. A successful businessman, a philanthropist, a rising star in London's elite circles, but behind the perfectly tailored suits and flashy social media posts, he was hiding a secret so dangerous it would ruin lives and topple the empire he spent years building. One small mistake, one single slip would expose him, and the world would finally see the truth. Rajiv Kapoor was a man who seemed to have it all. To anyone passing by his sleek office in central London, he appeared to be the very definition of success. The glass doors reflected the city's bustling streets, but inside everything seemed calm, controlled and meticulously organized. Rajiv's name was whispered in elite circles as someone who knew how to turn ideas into fortunes. His LinkedIn page told one story, his Instagram another: yachts, luxury cars, charity galas, and invitations to exclusive business forums. To the public eye, he was the embodiment of wealth, charm, and vision. But appearances, as often is the case, were deceiving. Behind the tailored suits and polished shoes was a man who had constructed a life based on deception. Rajiv's empire was not built on hard work alone. It was built on manipulation, fraud, and a carefully orchestrated network of lies. From the outside, he ran a legitimate business importing electronics, rare spices, and luxury goods. But the truth was far more sinister. Rajiv had created an elaborate scam targeting wealthy investors, promising them returns so generous they seemed almost impossible. The money he displayed in his bank accounts and on paper statements was not real. It was a mirage, a lure crafted to make people trust him. His operations were intricate. Rajiv forged contracts, produced fake invoices, and generated financial statements that appeared flawless to even the most cautious investors. Shell companies dotted across London and Mumbai were used to move money with perfect timing, creating the illusion of legitimate profits. Every detail was calculated: the way he answered calls, the way his office smelled of expensive furniture polish, the expensive pens on his desk, all signals of wealth meant to distract and impress. Even his charitable donations were staged, designed to show him as someone trustworthy and philanthropic. No one outside his inner circle suspected the truth. Rajiv's network was vast and well managed. He relied on accomplices who were carefully selected for their loyalty and discretion, accountants who could overlook irregularities, lawyers who could draft documents that looked legitimate but concealed the truth, and friends who could lend credibility to his persona. All played a role. He even cultivated relationships with influential figures, ensuring that his name carried a weight that made investors hesitant to question him. The more elaborate the network, the more convincing his story became. Each new success reinforced the illusion that Rajiv was a master businessman. For years it seemed that Rajiv could do no wrong. Investors poured in, excited by the prospect of fast and high returns. Luxury cars were displayed at high-profile events, opulent properties were bought and renovated, and social media buzzed with stories of his achievements. The web he had woven was so strong that even when whispers of doubt began to circulate, few dared to challenge him. The more people believed in his success, the more secure he felt. He thrived on the illusion he had created, confident in his ability to maintain it indefinitely. But no empire, no matter how carefully constructed, is immune to human error. Rajiv's greatest weakness was his overconfidence. Every new scheme he launched, every forged document he created, and every interaction he had with investors was a small gamble. He believed he was untouchable, that the complexity of his operations would always protect him from discovery. Yet, in his overconfidence, he failed to account for one simple truth. Even the smallest slip could unravel everything he had worked for, and that slip would come unexpectedly, in a moment so ordinary it seemed insignificant. A single mistake, something as mundane as sending the wrong file to the wrong person, would ignite a chain reaction that no charm, no wealth, and no network could stop. The life Rajiv Kapoor had built so meticulously, the perfect mask of success, was about to begin crumbling, revealing a truth that would shock everyone who had believed in him. Rajiv Kapoor's scam was more than a single deception. It was an entire ecosystem of lies carefully constructed to appear seamless. While most people saw only the surface, luxury cars, lavish parties, and the buzz of media attention behind closed doors, every move was calculated, every conversation carefully scripted. To outsiders, it looked like Rajiv was a brilliant businessman, with a sharp mind for investments. In reality, his life was a labyrinth of false identities, fake companies, and forged documents designed to convince investors that he was untouchable. At the heart of the operation were his shell companies. They were registered in different parts of the world, with names that sounded impressive but existed only on paper. Some were supposedly based in London, others in Mumbai, and a few even claimed addresses in tax havens overseas. Through these companies, Rajiv moved money with precision, creating an illusion of profitability and growth. Funds would appear to be invested in legitimate ventures, while in truth, they were siphoned into hidden accounts that only he controlled. The complexity was staggering, but this very complexity was what made it convincing. Investors saw layers of transactions and assumed sophistication, not deception. Rajiv also understood the psychology of trust. He knew that wealth and appearance could influence perception as much as numbers on a balance sheet. Every meeting, every handshake, and every presentation was meticulously designed to reinforce confidence. He would invite potential investors to his office, a space filled with symbols of success, expensive furniture, sleek technology, awards that looked official, and even framed certificates of fictitious achievements. These props, combined with his calm, confident demeanor, made people feel safe and reassured. Emails and reports played a central role in maintaining the illusion. Rajiv produced detailed monthly statements showing massive profits and strategic investments. Each document was carefully crafted to withstand scrutiny. Even auditors, when presented with what appeared to be legitimate contracts and invoices, found nothing obviously wrong. Those who questioned inconsistencies were subtly intimidated, often with legal-sounding letters or friendly warnings that suggested trouble could arise from unnecessary interference. The system was airtight, or so Rajiv believed. Yet, the human element was always a risk. Accomplices could make mistakes, accountants could ask too many questions, and investors could become suspicious. To counteract this, Rajiv was constantly monitoring every aspect of his operation. Phone calls were recorded, emails double-checked, and meetings rehearsed in advance. He prided himself on being meticulous, thinking of himself as a chess player moving multiple pieces at once, always 3 steps ahead of anyone who might threaten him. Despite all the caution, cracks were beginning to form. Rajiv's ambition had grown beyond his original plans. He wanted more investors, larger sums, and riskier schemes, all to maintain the illusion of growth and success. The higher he climbed, the more fragile the structure became. A single oversight, a misfiled document, a mistyped email, or even a conversation overheard, could trigger suspicion and unravel everything. Investors, meanwhile, were beginning to sense inconsistencies. Some noticed delays in payments, small discrepancies in statements, or transactions that didn't quite make sense. Most brushed it off, trusting Rajiv's charm and reputation. But a few sharp individuals started asking questions, documenting details, and comparing notes. The tension was quietly building, and Rajiv remained unaware that the walls of his carefully constructed empire were starting to close in. What made the operation so dangerous was its elegance. Rajiv had created a system where almost everyone involved felt complicit, willingly or unwillingly. Each piece of the puzzle relied on trust and deception simultaneously. The network was strong, but it was also volatile, like a high-stakes game where one wrong move could bring the entire structure crashing down. And soon, that move would come, not from a rival, not from an outsider, but from a simple human error that Rajiv could never have anticipated. Rajiv Kapoor had always believed that his careful planning made him untouchable. He had created an intricate web of accounts, companies and documents so complex that even seasoned auditors would struggle to see through it. For years, every email, every transfer and every meeting was executed with precision, But no matter how careful someone is, the smallest mistake can undo years of preparation, and in Rajiv's case, that mistake was closer than he ever imagined. It began with a simple email. Rajiv had been preparing to send a set of documents to one of his trusted partners overseas, someone who had been helping him manage transactions through a series of shell companies. The documents contained reports, account summaries, and investment plans, all appearing legitimate to someone who was meant to receive them. However, in a moment of distraction, Rajiv attached the files to the wrong email and sent them to an investor who had already started to feel uneasy about the returns he was seeing. The investor, a cautious and methodical man, noticed something unusual. The attachments didn't match the usual format of the monthly reports, and the numbers seemed inconsistent with previous statements. Curiosity, and perhaps a little suspicion, led him to examine the files more closely. What he discovered was alarming. Hidden transactions, transfers to unknown accounts, and documents that directly contradicted the reports Rajiv had been sending for months. It wasn't just a mistake, it was proof of deception. This single email set off a chain reaction that Rajiv could not control. The investor quietly began collecting evidence, saving emails, screenshots, and transaction records. He didn't confront Rajiv immediately. Instead, he reached out to financial authorities in London, providing them with a detailed account of what he quietly began collecting evidence, saving emails, screenshots, and transaction records. He didn't confront Rajiv immediately. Instead, he reached out to financial authorities in London, providing them with a detailed account of what he had discovered. The authorities, trained to spot patterns in complex financial crimes, immediately recognized the potential scale of the scam. What seemed like minor discrepancies were actually part of a much larger operation. Rajiv, unaware of the error, continued with his usual routines. He met with investors, signed contracts, and reassured worried clients that everything was under control. But behind the scenes, authorities were digging deeper. Each document from the accidental email provided new leads. Bank accounts were traced, shell companies investigated, and colleagues discreetly questioned. The perfect image Rajiv had built over years began to show cracks. As investigators pieced together the evidence, it became clear that Rajiv's operations were far more elaborate than anyone had suspected. He hadn't just been falsifying reports, he had orchestrated a massive scheme involving multiple countries, a network of accomplices, and millions of pounds. The complexity that had once protected him now made it impossible to hide the truth. Every layer of deception revealed another layer beneath it, creating a trail of proof that could not be ignored. The irony was cruel. Rajiv's downfall was not caused by a rival, an alert employee, or a dramatic tip-off. It was caused by his own carelessness. Years of meticulous planning were undone by a single oversight, a minor slip that no one could have predicted. The incident served as a reminder that even the most controlled schemes can unravel through human error. Soon, the first official warnings reached Rajiv. Financial regulators contacted him for explanations, and investigators began tracking his movements and transactions. What had once seemed untouchable now seemed vulnerable. The empire he had built, the perfect illusion of success, was beginning to collapse under its own weight. And while Rajiv may have thought he could recover from a simple mistake, the reality was harsher. This single slip would set in motion a series of events that would ultimately bring the entire operation crashing down. Once the authorities received the evidence from the accidental email, the investigation into Rajiv Kapoor's empire moved quickly. Financial crime units in London coordinated with agencies in Mumbai, and soon, a team of investigators was tracing every transaction, company registration, and bank account connected to him. What began as a single suspicious email revealed a web of deception that stretched across continents, involving millions of pounds and countless victims. The investigators discovered that Rajiv's shell companies were more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Accounts were opened in the names of fictitious directors, using forged identification documents and fraudulent business licenses. Money moved between these accounts in complex patterns, giving the illusion of legitimate investments. In reality, funds were being funneled into hidden personal accounts, where Rajiv had sole access. Each layer of the scheme had been carefully planned to evade scrutiny, and yet the tiny slip in sending the wrong email had exposed a hidden doorway into the network. The team worked tirelessly, tracing the flow of money through multiple currencies and jurisdictions. Every transfer, every signature, every document was examined for inconsistencies. Investigators discovered that Rajiv had purchased luxury properties and cars under various corporate names to make them appear as legitimate business assets. Even charity donations, once thought to reflect generosity, were revealed to be part of his plan to create trust and legitimacy. Every glamorous event, every social media post, and every public appearance had been a calculated move to distract from the truth. The deeper the investigation went, the more shocking the findings became. Rajiv had managed to manipulate not just individuals but entire organizations. Lawyers who had supposedly overseen his contracts were complicit, whether knowingly or through negligence. Accountants had processed falsified financial statements. Employees, carefully screened, had maintained the illusion of normal operations. Each piece of the puzzle reinforced the scale and audacity of the scam. What was truly extraordinary was not only the money involved, but the amount of trust he had deliberately exploited. Families, charities, and small business owners had all fallen prey to his charm and carefully staged success. As investigators continued to uncover the layers of Rajiv's empire, they realized that the empire's complexity was both its strength and its weakness. The intricate networks of transactions, designed to conceal the truth, had left a digital trail. Emails, spreadsheets, and recorded meetings provided evidence that no amount of charm or legal maneuvering could erase. Every attempt Rajiv had made to cover his tracks after the accidental email was only making the investigation easier. Authorities were able to map the flow of money, identify accomplices, and document each fraudulent scheme with clarity. For Rajiv, the realization that he was under serious scrutiny came gradually. At first he dismissed the inquiries as minor inconveniences, confident that he could talk his way out of any problem. But as the investigation deepened, the scope of evidence against him became impossible to ignore. Even allies in his network began to panic, unsure of how to protect themselves or their own involvement. Some chose to cooperate with authorities, providing additional evidence that further tightened the net around him. By the time investigators were ready to move in, they had built an irrefutable case. The trail left by Rajiv's oversight had grown into a map of his entire operation, revealing the full scale of his crimes. What had started as a single careless mistake, the accidental email, had now exposed a multi-million-pound scam, connecting him to a vast network of deception and greed. The empire that had once seemed untouchable was now fully exposed, and Rajiv Kapoor's carefully constructed world was beginning to collapse in ways he could never have imagined. The arrest of Rajiv Kapoor was the culmination of months of meticulous investigation. Authorities moved carefully, aware of the scale of his operation and the potential for evidence to disappear if he sensed danger. Early one morning, a team of officers quietly surrounded his London mansion, a sprawling property filled with luxury cars, designer furniture, and all the trappings of wealth that had once impressed investors and neighbors alike. Inside, Rajiv was still unaware of the full extent of the net closing around him. When the doors were finally opened, the authorities quickly secured the premises. Computers were seized, files were copied, and bank statements frozen. Investigators catalogued every document, tracing funds to hidden accounts across multiple countries. Luxury items that had once been symbols of Rajiv's status were now evidence of his deception. The mansion, which had served as the perfect backdrop for his carefully staged public image, became a tangible reminder of the contrast between illusion and reality. The trial that followed captivated the nation. News outlets covered every detail, from the opulent lifestyle Rajiv had maintained to the sophisticated methods he had used to manipulate investors. The courtroom became a stage where years of deception were meticulously exposed. Layer by layer, prosecutors presented emails, contracts, and financial records that traced every fraudulent transaction. Witnesses, including investors, employees, and accomplices, detailed how Rajiv had engineered the scam, exploiting trust, charm, and carefully orchestrated appearances to conceal the truth. One of the most shocking revelations was how ordinary people had been drawn into the scheme. Families had invested life savings, charities had been persuaded to contribute significant donations, and small business owners had relied on Rajiv's promises for growth. The scale of the betrayal was staggering. People who had once celebrated his success now felt the sting of deception, realizing that their trust had been exploited for personal gain. Despite his efforts to appear composed, the courtroom proceedings revealed cracks in Rajiv's confidence. The same charm that had convinced investors and friends for years could not withstand the weight of overwhelming evidence. Every email, every account trace, and every testimony added another layer of certainty for the jury. It became clear that his network of lies, so carefully constructed over the years, could not survive scrutiny when subjected to the concentrated focus of law enforcement and the legal system. In the end, it was the same small error that had triggered the investigation. The accidental email that had brought the entire empire to light. What had seemed insignificant at the time revealed the full scope of his deception. The very system Rajiv had built to protect himself had been compromised by a single human mistake. It was a dramatic reminder that even the most intricate plans are vulnerable to imperfection, and that one slip can have consequences far beyond what anyone might anticipate. Sentencing was swift once the evidence was overwhelming. Rajiv Kapoor was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The court ordered restitution to investors wherever possible, though much of the money could never be fully recovered. The media described the case as one of the most sophisticated scams in recent British Indian history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind trust and the allure of wealth and charm. As Rajiv was led away from the courtroom, the public was left with a mixture of shock and fascination. The life he had built on lies, the empire that seemed untouchable, and the carefully curated image of success had all crumbled. The story served as a warning. Appearances can deceive, and even the cleverest schemes can fall apart from the smallest, most ordinary mistakes. Rajiv Kapoor's downfall was complete, and the world had witnessed the consequences of ambition, arrogance, and one fateful